By 1908, Colgate's Jersey City factory pushed 12 million toothpaste tubes a year, employed 2,000 workers, and fed a market where over 90% of Americans had never brushed their teeth. But the product that made them dominant once mixed cocaine, morphine, and chloroform, and later hid triclosan risks for 30 years. Inside that factory, executives chased trust while choosing silence. Founded by William Colgate, perfected on the Hudson River, and exported worldwide, the brand taught America to brush, then taught itself to delay the truth. This is the story of how pain relief beat prevention, marketing beat medicine, and why trust your dentist became a corporate shield, and what that choice cost workers, families, and credibility. Pain before prevention. In 1873, a dental pain mattered more than decay, and relief sold faster than science. William Colgate understood that much when he launched his aromatic toothpaste in Lower Manhattan. The Civil War had ended 8 years earlier, leaving hundreds of thousands of men with shattered jaws and rotted teeth, their mouths destroyed by battlefield medicine and hardtack rations. Urban Americans faced a brutal dental reality. By age 40, more than half had lost most of their teeth to infection and decay. Dentistry meant extraction, not preservation. A tooth that hurt came out. The idea of preventing that pain barely existed, so Colgate sold what people wanted: relief first, prevention maybe never. His early formula blended chalk, soap, and glycerin with a trinity of numbing agents: cocaine extract from Peruvian leaves, a morphine tincture from Turkish poppies, and chloroform distilled in New Jersey laboratories. To a Victorian consumer, this wasn't dangerous. This was modern. Cocaine appeared in throat lozenges and children's teething powder. Morphine calmed coughs and cramps. Chloroform had put patients to sleep in operating theaters for 2 decades. Why wouldn't you rub these compounds on inflamed gums? The science of the era supported it. Dental textbooks published in 1870 recommended cocaine paste for socket pain. The American Dental Association, founded just 13 years earlier, had no ingredient restrictions and no testing protocols. If a substance numbed pain and patients bought it, dentists endorsed it. Dr. Samuel Harris, practicing on Chambers Street 3 blocks from Colgate's first warehouse, kept jars of the aromatic paste on his examination table. He charged 75 cents for an extraction and gave patients a dollop of Colgate's product to take home. The paste cost them another dime. Harris told patients it would help healing. What it actually did was mask the infection spreading underneath. But masking pain was the entire point. Factory workers earning $1 to $1.50 per day couldn't afford to miss shifts for dental surgery. A laborer in the Brooklyn Navy Yard or the Erie Railroad Depot lived with toothaches because losing a day's wages meant his family didn't eat. Colgate's paste offered a compromise. Rub it on, numb the throb, finish the shift. The fact that the abrasives in the formula, crushed cuttlefish bone and silica particles, stripped enamel with every brush, didn't register as a problem. Enamel loss happened slowly. Pain happened now. William Colgate himself believed in the product. Born in England in 1770, he had arrived in America as a boy and apprenticed with a soapmaker on Dutch Street. By the time he launched toothpaste, he ran a factory employing 300 workers and producing 500,000 bars of soap annually. He saw oral care as an extension of cleanliness, which he genuinely believed sat next to godliness. A devout Baptist, Colgate tithed faithfully and funded missions. When he formulated his paste, he wasn't scheming to addict customers. He was following the medical consensus of his time: Pain relief mattered more than long-term consequences nobody yet understood. The chemists mixing batches in his Hudson Street facility weren't villains either. They were men like Thomas Miller, a German immigrant trained in Frankfurt, who measured cocaine by the grain and morphine by the dram, writing quantities in leather notebooks with careful Teutonic precision. Miller earned $18 a week, exceptional wages for the era, because precision mattered. Too much cocaine caused heart palpitations. Too little left the paste ineffective. He calibrated batches to numb pain without triggering complaints, adjusting formulas based on returned product and dentist feedback. When Miller went home to his family in a Fifth Ward tenement, he believed he'd spent his day helping people. The fact that he was also habituating them to opioids never crossed his mind. This was good faith ignorance, the kind that builds industries before it destroys them. And Colgate's paste sold because it worked according to the standards of 1873. It reduced suffering in the moment, that the moment kept returning, that the underlying decay continued untreated, that the numbing agents carried risks nobody had studied. None of that mattered to a market that measured success by immediate relief. What they didn't know yet was that relief without prevention created a dependency loop. Customers returned not because their dental health improved, but because it never did. The paste didn't cure anything. It postponed consequences. And in that postponement, Colgate found a business model that would power the company for decades, sell the solution to a problem you're quietly perpetuating. They just didn't realize that's what they were doing. Not yet. Good intentions, as it turned out, could be profitable and dangerous at the same time. By 1875, Colgate's aromatic toothpaste appeared in general stores from Boston to St. Louis. The formula that started as pain relief was becoming a habit, and habits, once established, proved very hard to break. Manufacturing trust. Scaling pain relief required factories, not apothecaries. The habit Colgate created in the 1870s couldn't spread beyond a few thousand customers, while pharmacists hand-filled jars in back rooms. William Colgate understood this by 1880. His soap business had taught him that consistency at scale built brand loyalty. If every bar of Cashmere Bouquet smelled identical, whether bought in Philadelphia or Cleveland, customers learned to trust the name. The same principle would work for toothpaste. But the chemistry proved harder. Cocaine extract varied in potency depending on the harvest. Morphine tinctures oxidized differently in summer heat versus winter cold. Hand mixing meant every batch carried slight variations in texture, strength, and shelf stability. The solution was mechanization, and it started in a 3-story brick building Colgate leased on Jersey Street in 1882. He installed steam-powered mixers from a bankrupt paint manufacturer, repurposing equipment designed to blend pigments. The mixers could process 200 pounds of paste per hour, 10 times faster than manual methods. More importantly, they homogenized ingredients completely. Every tube now contained the same ratio of cocaine to chalk to glycerin, measured not by eye, but by calibrated valves and timed mixing cycles. James Kellerman ran the mixing floor. A former artillery sergeant from the Union Army, Kellerman approached paste production like loading cannons, each step sequenced and timed. He hired 12 men at $9 per week, teaching them to read pressure gauges and operate feed hoppers. Most had worked in breweries or tanneries, jobs where precision prevented explosions or ruined batches. Kellerman drilled them on timing. Cocaine extract entered the mixer at minute 4, morphine at minute 7, chloroform at minute 9. Early mixing dulled the cocaine. Late mixing left it concentrated in portions of the batch. His workers learned to watch the consistency through glass inspection ports, waiting for the moment the paste turned uniformly smooth. The mixing floor wasn't glamorous. Summer heat pushed temperatures past 90 degrees. The chloroform vapors caused headaches and dizziness until Kellerman installed ventilation fans in 1884. But the men took pride in the work. They were building something uniform, something reliable. When a tube of Colgate paste left that factory, it performed exactly like every other tube. That consistency became the company's implicit promise. We control quality so you can trust the product. The real transformation came in packaging. Before 1885, Colgate filled paste into ceramic jars, each one hand-labeled and sealed with cork and wax. The jars cost 8 cents apiece, nearly half the retail price of 20 cents. Breakage during shipping ran at 15%. Then a Baltimore machinist named John Wesley Hyatt invented collapsible metal tubes for artist paint. Colgate's production manager, Edward Thompson, visited Hyatt's workshop in 1886 and immediately saw the application. Metal tubes cost 3 cents, weighed 1/10 as much as ceramic, and breakage dropped to under 2%. Thompson negotiated a licensing deal and ordered tube-making equipment installed by December. By spring of 1887, the Jersey Street factory produced 40,000 tubes daily. Packaging costs fell 32%. Profit margins on each unit jumped from 3 cents to nearly 7. More critically, metal tubes meant longer shelf life. Ceramic jars allowed air penetration within weeks, degrading the cocaine and morphing the glycerin. Sealed metal tubes kept paste stable for 6 months, enabling distribution across the continent. The workers saw the change in their paychecks. Jim Kellerman's mixing crew expanded to 18 men. A new filling line required another 20 workers, mostly women hired at $6 weekly to operate the semi-automated tube filling machines. These machines, adapted from pharmaceutical equipment, filled, crimped, and capped tubes at a rate of 300 per hour per operator. The women worked in rows, watching tubes move down conveyor belts, their hands flying to correct any tube that filled unevenly or crimped poorly. Speed mattered, but accuracy mattered more. A poorly sealed tube leaked in transit, and a leaked tube destroyed trust. That word, trust, appeared everywhere in internal memos by 1890. Thompson wrote to Colgate that consistency builds confidence. Confidence builds repeat purchase. Repeat purchase builds markets. He was right. The factory that produced uniform product at scale didn't just make toothpaste. It manufactured the perception of safety through reliability. If every tube looked identical and performed identically, customers assumed identical safety. No one tested whether that assumption held true. The act of standardization itself became the safety guarantee. By 1893, the Jersey Street factory employed 240 workers and produced 12 million tubes annually. They had turned pain relief into a production science, ingredient risks into quality-controlled precision. Pride in that precision ran through every shift. What none of them realized yet was that perfect consistency could perfectly distribute a dangerous formula. They were building trust on a foundation that would eventually crack. But first, they needed to teach America why brushing mattered at all. That required a different kind of machinery, advertising, selling a habit America didn't have. Before 1900, brushing was rare, so Colgate sold the idea first. The problem wasn't competition. The problem was indifference. Americans didn't wake up craving toothpaste because most Americans didn't brush their teeth at all. an 1896 survey by the New York Department of Health found that fewer than 7% of urban households owned toothbrushes. Rural numbers ran lower. The entire concept of daily oral hygiene struck most people as eccentric, something fastidious wealthy folks did, like changing clothes twice daily or using different forks for different courses. Working families had more urgent concerns: keeping food on the table, staying employed, and surviving childhood diseases that killed 1 in 5 children before age 10. Worrying about tooth decay seemed like a luxury. Colgate's head of sales, George Bunting, recognized the challenge in 1897. The factory could now produce 20 million tubes annually, but Americans were only buying 4 million. Bunting had spent 12 years as a traveling salesman for soap products, riding rail lines across the Midwest, staying in boarding houses, convincing general store owners to stock Colgate goods. He knew customer behavior. You couldn't sell a product for a habit people didn't have. You had to sell the habit first, then the product. So Bunting proposed something radical: spend money to create demand rather than capture it. He requested $50,000 for a national advertising campaign, an enormous sum when the company's total annual profit sat around $200,000. William Colgate, now 72 and mostly retired, initially refused. His son Samuel reviewed the proposal and saw the logic. They couldn't grow by waiting for brushing to catch on. They needed to make it catch on. The campaign launched in 1898 across newspapers and magazines in 38 states. The core message wasn't about pain relief anymore. It was about social acceptance and moral duty. One advertisement showed a well-dressed woman turning away from a man in evident disgust, the headline reading, "Even your best friend won't tell you." The copy didn't mention tooth decay or gum disease. It mentioned breath, perception, respectability. Brushing wasn't health advice. It was social survival. Another series of advertisements targeted mothers with quasi-medical authority. They featured illustrations of dentists in white coats, stethoscopes visible, recommending Colgate paste for children. The dentists weren't real. The testimonials were fabricated. But the association with medical authority proved powerful. Mothers who ignored their own dental health took their children's health seriously. If a doctor-looking figure in a magazine said brushing prevented disease, mothers bought tubes. Bunting's real genius was recruiting actual dentists. He hired traveling representatives who visited dental offices in every major city, offering free cases of toothpaste that dentists could hand to patients. The pitch was simple: you're losing patients to pain they endured too long. Get them brushing daily. They maintain teeth longer. They need your services for maintenance instead of extraction. Every tube we give you carries your implied endorsement. The dentists received free product. Colgate received credible validators. Dr. Milton Jacobs, practicing in Chicago, became one of the earliest adopters. He started recommending Colgate paste to every patient in 1901 and tracked results in his ledgers. Within 2 years, extraction appointments dropped 18%, while filling appointments rose 31%. His income actually increased because fillings paid better than extractions and required follow-up visits. Jacobs wrote enthusiastic letters to dental journals, which Bunting then reprinted in advertisements. Real dentist, real name, real results. The credibility compounded. By 1905, Colgate was spending $1.2 million annually on advertising, more than any other consumer goods company except Ivory Soap. Distribution reached all 48 states. Brand recognition surveys showed 73% of urban residents recognized the Colgate name. More remarkably, 28% of households reported brushing at least once weekly, quadruple the rate from a decade earlier. The habit was taking hold, and with it, a transformation in how Americans understood health and morality. Clean teeth meant clean living. Brushing meant discipline, self-respect, care for appearance. The act became ritualized, parents teaching children, schools adding hygiene instruction to curricula. What started as marketing became culture. Inside the Jersey City factory that now employed 800 workers and consumed 30 freight cars of raw materials monthly, pride swelled. They weren't just making toothpaste. They were improving the nation. The conviction that their product served a moral good hardened into absolute certainty. They believed what they advertised. They believed the dentists they recruited. They believed brushing with Colgate paste prevented disease, improved lives, built healthier communities. And for the most part, compared to not brushing at all, they were right. What they didn't examine was whether the formula itself was safe. The effectiveness of the advertising obscured the dangers in the ingredients. Success became its own validation. If millions of Americans brushed with Colgate paste and the brand grew stronger every year, how could anything be wrong? That certainty, built on market dominance and cultural acceptance, would make the coming revelations much harder to confront. The Jersey City Monument. On the Hudson, brick and steel turned toothpaste into identity. The factory that rose between Grand Street and the waterfront starting in 1903 wasn't just larger than the old Jersey Street facility. It was a different category of industrial architecture entirely. 22 acres of land purchased from the Erie Railroad for $380,000. 6 interconnected buildings, the tallest rising 7 stories, constructed with red brick from Pennsylvania kilns and steel beams from Bethlehem iron. The main production hall stretched 400 feet long, 200 feet wide, in its roof supported by columns spaced in perfect 30-foot intervals. Natural light flooded through banks of windows that a crew of 8 workers cleaned every Saturday. This wasn't a factory. This was a monument to what mass production could achieve when capital met ambition. Samuel Colgate, now running the company after his father's death in 1897, commissioned the complex with a specific vision: consolidate all production under one roof, eliminate the inefficiencies of multiple scattered facilities, and create a workplace that announced permanence. The Hudson River location provided transportation access via barges and rail sidings, but it also provided something less tangible: visibility. Ships entering New York Harbor passed directly by the facility. The Colgate name, and painted in white letters 12 feet tall across the east facade, greeted immigrants arriving at Ellis Island 2 miles south. The factory was advertisement and achievement simultaneously. Production began in April 1908, with 400 workers transferred from older facilities. Within 18 months, employment reached 2,000. The company paid union-scale wages, $13 weekly for line workers, $18 for machinists, $25 for chemists and supervisors. These weren't poverty wages. A Jersey City tenement rented for $4 monthly. $13 weekly meant a family could afford rent, food, and still bank money. Benefits included 1 week paid vacation after 5 years, half pay for workplace injuries, and a company doctor who saw workers and their families for 50 cents per visit. The workforce organized itself into a rhythm that felt almost organic. First shift started at 6 in the morning, second at 2 in the afternoon, third at 10 at night. Each shift ran 8 hours, unusual generosity when most factories demanded 10 or 12. Shift changes happened in 15-minute windows that transformed Grand Street into a river of humanity. Workers leaving past workers arriving, lunch pails swinging, boots scuffing pavement. The corner store run by Morris Klein extended credit to Colgate workers on handshake alone. Their paychecks were guaranteed. Multi-generational employment emerged quickly and became factory culture. Thomas Brennan hired on as a mixer operator in 1909, age 19, learning the timing sequences for ingredient addition from James Kellerman, who'd moved over from the old facility. Brennan's son Jack joined in 1928, running one of the new automated tube filling lines. By 1946, Jack's son Thomas Jr. started in quality control, inspecting tubes for proper seals. 3 generations of Brennans, 57 combined years of service. They attended the same Catholic church on Newark Avenue, lived in the same neighborhood, knew the same families. The factory wasn't where they worked, it was who they were. The safety culture ran deep because the materials demanded it. Mixing chloroform and cocaine required ventilation systems that moved 16,000 cubic feet of air per minute through the production halls. Workers on the chemical lines wore canvas aprons and cotton gloves, replaced weekly. The company installed eye wash stations every 100 feet after a 1912 incident, where a valve failure sprayed cocaine solution into operator Frank Kowalski's face. Kowalski recovered fully, but the station stayed. Supervisors tracked injury rates monthly. Any department exceeding 2 incidents per 1,000 worker hours triggered investigation and process review. The factory floor foreman, Henry Mueller, kept a leather notebook documenting every safety procedure and process improvement from 1913 until his retirement in 1941. Mueller had learned manufacturing in German machine shops and brought that precision to workforce management. He knew every worker by name, every machine by its quirks. When Line 7's crimping mechanism started producing defective seals at twice the normal rate, Mueller didn't write up the operators. He shut down the line, disassembled the crimper, found a worn gear, and had it replaced. Production mattered, but accuracy mattered more. A defective tube represented failure, and failure reflected on everyone. The community impact radiated beyond paychecks. Property values within 6 blocks of the factory rose 40% between 1908 and 1920. 2 elementary schools built new wings, funded partly by increased tax revenue. Sacred Heart Church on Erie Street expanded its basement to accommodate Catholic workers attending weekday Mass before first shift. The Jersey City Board of Education started vocational programs specifically designed to prepare students for Colgate employment, teaching basic chemistry and mechanical principles. Landing a factory job became the neighborhood's marker of adulthood and stability. Inside those brick walls, workers produced 12 million tubes annually by 1920, 26 million by 1935. The numbers represented more than output. They represented security in an era when security was scarce. Through the Depression, Colgate maintained employment when other factories shuttered. Wages dropped 12% in 1932, but nobody got laid off. Workers who'd seen breadlines and Hoovervilles considered themselves fortunate beyond measure. What bound them together wasn't just wages or benefits. It was the belief that the work mattered, that the product improved lives, that the company valued their contribution. They trusted Colgate because Colgate had earned that trust through steady employment and fair treatment. The factory became their second family, sometimes their first. Belonging meant something when the outside world offered mostly uncertainty. That trust, built over decades of reliability, would prove difficult to maintain when the science changed. But in 1935, with production soaring and employment secure, collapse seemed impossible. Peak power. Red and white boxes meant cleanliness itself. By 1952, Colgate owned American oral hygiene so completely that the brand name had become a verb. Mothers didn't tell children to brush their teeth. They told them to Colgate. In the distinctive red and white packaging appeared in 78% of American bathrooms, according to a Nielsen survey commissioned that year. Competitors existed: Pepsodent, Ipana, Dr. Lyons, but they fought for scraps. Colgate commanded 53% market share, a dominance in consumer goods matched only by Coca-Cola in soft drinks and Kellogg's in cereals. The financial performance reflected that power. Annual revenues reached $212 million in 1953, equivalent to roughly $2.1 billion in modern currency. Net margins ran at 17%, exceptional for a consumer packaged goods company where 10% was considered healthy. The Jersey City factory alone generated $48 million in annual profit, more than the entire revenue of most American manufacturers. Every 8-hour shift produced enough toothpaste to supply 300,000 people for a month. The scale was almost incomprehensible. Richard Dupre, who became president in 1948 after 23 years rising through sales and marketing, understood that this dominance wasn't accidental. It was engineered through cultural penetration so complete that alternatives seemed almost un-American. Dupre, a Cincinnati native who'd studied business at Cornell, ran Colgate with the precision of a military campaign. He allocated 18% of revenue to advertising, double the industry average. But the spending wasn't scattered. It focused on a single message delivered through every available channel. Dentists recommend Colgate. The dentist endorsement strategy had evolved far beyond George Bunting's early free sample program. By 1950, Colgate employed 42 sales representatives whose sole job was maintaining relationships with dental professionals. These reps visited practices monthly, dropping off free samples, providing branded waiting room posters, and delivering studies, funded by Colgate, showing cavity reduction among regular brushers. The studies were real, conducted by university researchers who received Colgate grants. The results genuinely showed improvement. What the studies didn't examine was whether Colgate worked better than competitors, or whether any toothpaste used consistently would produce similar results. Dr. Harold Finch, president of the American Dental Association in 1951, spoke at Colgate's annual sales conference that year. His message was unequivocal. The partnership between Colgate and dentistry had elevated national oral health beyond recognition. Cavity rates among children had dropped 28% since 1935. Adult tooth retention at age 60 had improved from an average of 8 teeth to 17. Finch credited public health education and modern dentistry, but he reserved special praise for companies like Colgate, who made prevention accessible and affordable. What Finch didn't mention, because he didn't know, was that Colgate had paid the ADA $12,000 to sponsor the conference where he spoke. The payment wasn't corrupt. It was standard corporate sponsorship. But it created an intertwining of interests that made independent evaluation nearly impossible. Dentists recommended what they believed worked. They believed Colgate worked because Colgate-funded studies said so, and because their patients reported good results. The circular validation seemed ironclad. Inside the Jersey City factory, workers experienced this success as pure vindication. Arthur Simmons, who'd started on the mixing lines in 1937, and by 1952 ran the entire third shift as production supervisor, described the feeling in a company newsletter interview. "We're not just making toothpaste, we're making America healthier. Every tube that leaves this building helps a family, helps a kid avoid cavities, helps someone keep their teeth. That's real work. That matters." Simmons supervised 380 workers on third shift, many of whom had been with the company 15 or 20 years. They earned $22 weekly by 1952, nearly double the Jersey City median wage. The company had added a pension plan in 1946, contributing 6% of salary after 10 years of service. Healthcare coverage, nearly unheard of in the 1930s, now covered workers and dependents for a $3 monthly deduction. During annual reviews, Simmons watched men tear up when they realized they could send their kids to college on factory wages and company benefits. The executives, operating from headquarters offices built adjacent to the factory in 1949, radiated confidence that approached hubris. Board meetings focused on expansion, not defense. International markets beckoned. Television advertising offered new reach. Product line extensions, toothbrushes, dental floss, a mouthwash promised to capture the entire oral care routine. At a 1953 strategy session, marketing director Paul Henderson told the board that Colgate could achieve 60% market share within 5 years. Nobody challenged the projection. Why would they? Every trend pointed upward. Store shelves told the story most clearly. In a typical supermarket, Colgate products occupied 22 linear feet of oral care shelf space. Competitors combined got 18. Retailers allocated space based on sales velocity, and Colgate tubes move faster than anything else. A grocery manager in Newark reported turning his Colgate inventory 14 times annually, meaning every tube sold, and was restocked within 26 days. Nothing else in the store, not even milk or bread, matched that pace. This was commercial invincibility, the kind of market position that seemed permanent. Colgate wasn't just dominant, it felt inevitable, woven into American daily life so completely that imagining its decline seemed absurd. The red and white boxes represented certainty itself. But certainty has a dangerous property. It makes you stop questioning whether the foundation remains solid. And in the laboratories where new formulas were being developed, scientists were starting to notice things that didn't match the advertising promises. They were noticing and they were taking notes, and some of those notes would eventually become evidence. The factory that seemed invincible was already vulnerable. The workers just didn't know it yet. Neither did the executives. But the chemists, the ones actually testing the compounds being mixed in those steel vats, but they were beginning to suspect the ingredients that built the empire might also undermine it. Warnings in the lab. By 1985, internal science saw what ads wouldn't say. The compound was called triclosan, a chlorinated aromatic chemical synthesized in Switzerland in the 1960s and introduced to Colgate formulas in 1982. It killed bacteria efficiently, preventing plaque buildup better than any previous ingredient. Marketing loved it because clinical trials showed a 37% reduction in gingivitis among users who brushed twice daily. The new Colgate Total line, launched in 1983, carried triclosan as its signature innovation, backed by $70 million in advertising. Sales jumped 23% within 18 months. Everything about triclosan looked like a winner. except to Dr. Margaret Chen, a toxicologist hired into Colgate's research division in 1984. Chen had earned her doctorate from MIT, studying how chemical compounds crossed cellular membranes. Her specialty was endocrine disruption, the way certain molecules mimicked hormones and interfered with normal biological signaling. Colgate hired her specifically to evaluate new ingredients for safety, a standard practice following increased FDA scrutiny of consumer products in the late 1970s. Her job was to test, document, and report findings. She took the responsibility seriously. In March 1985, Chen ran standard hormone receptor binding assays on triclosan using rat thyroid tissue. The compound bound to thyroid hormone receptors at concentrations similar to what appeared in human saliva after brushing. She repeated the test 4 times with identical results, then expanded to estrogen and testosterone receptors. Triclosan showed weaker but measurable binding to both. The implications troubled her. If triclosan interfered with hormone signaling even slightly, long-term exposure through daily brushing could affect thyroid function, reproductive development, or metabolic regulation. She wrote a memo to her supervisor, Dr. Robert Yates, head of product safety. The memo, dated April 12, 1985, recommended immediate additional testing using primate models and suggested the company consider reformulation timelines. Chen emphasized that her findings weren't conclusive proof of harm, but they warranted serious investigation before continuing mass market distribution. Triclosan was going into mouths twice daily, every day, for millions of people. The margin for error was thin. Yates sat on the memo for 6 weeks. When he finally responded, he scheduled a meeting with Chen and 2 executives from the product development division, James Morrison, Vice President of Research and Development, and Carl Hendricks, who oversaw the Colgate Total product line. The meeting happened on June 4th in a windowless conference room on the 3rd floor of the headquarters building. Chen brought her lab notebooks and a slide deck showing the receptor binding data. Morrison listened for 20 minutes, asking technical questions about methodology and statistical significance. Then he asked the question that reframed everything. What's the regulatory requirement here? Does the FDA mandate we report these findings? Chen hesitated. The FDA didn't have specific testing requirements for toothpaste ingredients in 1985. The agency operated mostly on a complaint-driven model. Unless consumers reported acute harm, products remained on shelves. Morrison already knew this. He was establishing the legal boundary, not the ethical one. There's no requirement, Chen admitted. But the science suggests risk we haven't characterized. I think we have an obligation to understand it before continuing large-scale distribution. Hendricks spoke for the first time. Colgate Total is on track to generate $80 million in revenue this year. Reformulation would cost, 6 months of production downtime? 10 months of clinical trials for a new formula? We're talking about 20 to 30 million in lost sales, plus reformulation costs probably running another 8 to 10 million. For preliminary findings that don't prove actual harm? The calculation was coldly accurate. Hendricks's bonus structure tied directly to Colgate Total performance. He'd cleared $400,000 the previous year, more than his base salary. Shutting down the product line, even temporarily, would devastate his compensation and likely derail his trajectory towards senior vice president. Morrison made the decision without much deliberation. Continue monitoring. Expand the testing protocol if you think it's warranted, Margaret, but do it quietly. We're not making any formulation changes or public disclosures based on preliminary receptor binding data. Too many variables we don't understand. If additional testing shows clear evidence of harm, we'll revisit. Chen pushed back. Clear evidence means waiting for human health effects. By then, we've exposed millions of people for years. Or we've protected millions from gingivitis and gum disease, which are proven harms, Morrison countered. We balance risks, Dr. Chen. That's the job. Keep testing. Report what you find. We'll evaluate as data develops. The meeting ended. Chen returned to her lab knowing she'd lost the argument before it started. The business logic was airtight. Triclosan worked as advertised. Clinical trials showed benefits. Regulatory agencies hadn't raised concerns. Removing it meant admitting uncertainty, which meant inviting lawsuits, losing market share, and validating competitors who'd claim their products were safer. She continued testing through 1986 and 1987. Her results consistently showed hormone receptor binding. She documented everything in quarterly reports filed with Yates. The reports went into filing cabinets. No reformulation discussions occurred. No external disclosures were made. Colgate total sales reached $112 million by 1987. In 1988, Chen accepted a position at the Environmental Protection Agency. Her exit interview with Human Resources was cordial. Nobody asked why she was leaving. She didn't volunteer that she could no longer reconcile the gap between what the science showed and what the company chose to acknowledge. Robert Yates took over her testing protocols. He ran the assays less frequently, quarterly instead of monthly. The results stayed consistent. The receptor binding remained measurable, and the reports kept going into filing cabinets while the advertising kept promising safety endorsed by dentists. Down in the Jersey City factory, workers mixed triclosan into paste at concentrations of 0.3%, perfectly calibrated to kill bacteria and satisfy clinical trials. They had no idea what the lab report said. They trusted the chemists had tested everything. They trusted the executives valued safety. They trusted Colgate because Colgate had never betrayed that trust. That trust was becoming a liability because the choice wasn't to hide danger. It was simpler and more human than that. The choice was to wait, to gather more data, to avoid disruption, to protect revenue and careers and quarterly earnings. The choice was to believe that uncertainty justified delay. And delay, as it turned out, could stretch for decades when nobody forced you to act. Delay as strategy. The choice wasn't to lie, it was to wait. By 1990, Margaret Chen's findings had been joined by external research. A team at the University of Massachusetts published a paper in the Journal of Toxicology showing that triclosan accumulated in human breast milk at measurable concentrations. A Swedish study found the compound in 78% of urine samples from urban populations. The European Union began reviewing triclosan for potential regulatory restrictions. The evidence was mounting, and it was public. Colgate's response wasn't denial. It was delay dressed as scientific caution. The strategy took shape in a series of executive meetings through late 1990 and early 1991. The central figure was Thomas Moorhead, who'd become chief executive officer in 1989 after 31 years with the company. Moorhead had started as a sales representative in Toledo, worked his way through regional management, and spent the 1980s running international operations. He understood markets, distribution, and the leverage that came from being the category leader. At 62 years old, he was 3 years from planned retirement. His pension value, tied to average compensation over his final 5 years, stood at $11 million. Major disruptions to company performance would directly impact that number, and Moorhead convened what he called the Product Defense Committee in January 1991. The members included Robert Yates from Product Safety, now promoted to Senior Vice President of Research, James Morrison from R&D, Ellen Hartley from Legal, and David Chen, no relation to Margaret, who ran regulatory affairs. The committee's mandate was straightforward: protect Colgate Total while the science remained contested. The meeting minutes, later obtained during discovery in a class action lawsuit filed in 2008, reveal the calculus clearly. Hartley opened with a legal assessment. "We have no obligation to remove triclosan unless the FDA orders it," she told the group. "Current evidence shows potential concerns, not proven harm. As long as we can characterize this as ongoing scientific debate, we're protected from liability." Morrison presented the reformulation costs. Removing triclosan meant developing a new antibacterial agent, running clinical trials to prove efficacy, securing FDA approval for the reformulation, and rebuilding marketing around new claims. Time required: 3 to 4 years. Direct costs: $42 million. Lost revenue during reformulation and relaunch, estimated at $170 million. Total impact: over $200 million for a product line generating $300 million annually. But the financial calculation only told part of the story. David Chen, who'd spent 15 years navigating FDA relationships, explained the deeper risk. If we voluntarily reformulate, we're implicitly admitting the current formula isn't safe, and that opens us to lawsuits from everyone who used Colgate Total over the past 9 years. We're talking potential liability in the billions. Worse, it creates precedent. Every ingredient gets questioned. Competitors use our reformulation as proof their products are safer. We lose the trust advantage we've spent a century building. This was the fear that drove everything else, not the fear of regulation, the fear of precedent. If Colgate admitted uncertainty about triclosan, every product ingredient became vulnerable to similar scrutiny. Fluoride, which prevented cavities but could cause fluorosis in high doses. Sodium lauryl sulfate, which created foam but irritated sensitive tissues. Every chemical in every formula could be framed as a potential risk if you looked hard enough. Where would the line be drawn? Who would draw it? E. Moorhead listened to the presentations and made his decision. "We don't reformulate based on incomplete science. We engage the debate, fund research that examines the questions more thoroughly, work with the FDA to establish clear safety thresholds, participate in industry efforts to develop testing standards. But we do not concede that triclosan is unsafe based on current evidence." The strategy had a name inside Colgate: constructive engagement. It meant showing up at regulatory hearings, submitting comments on proposed rules, funding academic research, and maintaining dialogue with FDA officials. It meant being cooperative and reasonable while the wheels of government bureaucracy turned slowly, very slowly. Ellen Hartley's legal team handled the lobbying logistics. Between 1991 and 2010, Colgate spent approximately $87 million on regulatory affairs related to oral care products. Not all of it targeted triclosan specifically, but internal budget documents show that triclosan defense consumed about 40% of that total, roughly $35 million. The money funded several things: direct lobbying in Washington through hired firms like Patton Boggs and Akin Gump, grants to university researchers studying triclosan efficacy and safety with the understanding that Colgate could cite the results in regulatory filings. Trade association work through the American Chemistry Council and the Personal Care Products Council, industry groups that opposed triclosan restrictions, and legal fees preparing for the possibility that bans might eventually come. The lobbying worked. The FDA scheduled hearings on triclosan in 1994, then postponed them. Scheduled again in 1998, postponed again. Each postponement bought time. Each year of delay was another year of sales, another $300 million in revenue, another year closer to Moorhead's retirement. And Moorhead did retire in 1994, with his full pension intact and a legacy as the CEO who'd navigated Colgate through increasing regulatory pressure without major disruptions. His successor, Reuben Mark, inherited the strategy and continued it. Mark added a refinement, international expansion of Colgate Total into markets with less stringent regulation. If the European Union restricted triclosan, sell more in Asia and Latin America. Global revenue growth masked any single market losses. The bonuses reflected the priorities. Vice presidents received annual incentive compensation tied to revenue targets and margin protection. Reformulation wasn't a bonus metric. Maintaining market share was. David Chen earned $640,000 in total compensation in 2000, including bonus. His employment contract included a clause guaranteeing 2 years severance if he was terminated for refusing to support premature product withdrawals based on scientifically inconclusive evidence. The message was clear. Caution, even excessive caution, was rewarded. Aggressive action on uncertain risks carried career penalties. Inside the Jersey City factory, none of this was visible. Workers mixed triclosan into paste according to specifications that hadn't changed since 1982. And quality control checked concentration levels daily. Production targets were met. The paste worked exactly as designed, killing bacteria and preventing gingivitis in clinical trials that continued to show positive results. But outside the factory gates, the evidence kept accumulating. More studies linking triclosan to hormone disruption. More findings of environmental persistence, the compound showing up in rivers and fish tissue. More consumer advocacy groups calling for bans. The pressure built slowly, like water seeping into a dam, finding cracks, widening them incrementally. Colgate's strategy bought time, 30 years of time, from Margaret Chen's first memo in 1985 to the FDA's final ban on triclosan in toothpaste in 2016. But time purchased through delay carries interest. Every year the company postponed action was another year of exposure, another cohort of consumers using a product whose risks were documented internally but not disclosed publicly. The debt was accumulating, and when it came due, the cost would be measured not just in dollars, but in trust destroyed and lives disrupted. The factory that had seemed so solid was standing on a foundation of deferred consequences. The workers just didn't know it yet. Trust erodes. Lawsuits don't arrive quietly. The first class action complaint landed on Colgate's legal department on March 14, 2009, filed in federal court in Minneapolis by a woman named Sandra Whelan. She'd used Colgate Total for 11 years, brushing twice daily as recommended. In 2007, she'd been diagnosed with thyroid dysfunction. Her endocrinologist asked about chemical exposures. She mentioned toothpaste. The doctor pulled recent research on triclosan and endocrine disruption. Whelan hired an attorney. The complaint alleged negligence, failure to warn, and fraudulent misrepresentation. It sought class certification for anyone who'd purchased Colgate Total between 1997 and 2009. The legal theory was straightforward. Colgate knew or should have known about triclosan risks as early as 1985, but continued marketing the product as safe and dentist recommended. Internal memos from Margaret Chen's research were already public, leaked by a former employee to an environmental advocacy group in 2006. Those memos became Exhibit A. The complaint demanded damages, reformulation, and public disclosure of all internal safety testing. Colgate's initial response was aggressive denial. A statement released by Director of Corporate Communications, Patricia Lewis, called the lawsuit baseless and insisted triclosan was safe and effective as demonstrated by decades of clinical use and ongoing FDA review. The statement mentioned nothing about the internal testing, the receptor binding data, or the 30-year gap between first warnings and potential regulatory action. But the Whelan case wasn't alone. Within 6 months, 4 more class actions were filed in California, New York, Illinois, and Texas. Then came the individual lawsuits, 37 filed by December 2009, each claiming specific health effects allegedly caused by triclosan exposure. The legal expenses started mounting immediately. On Colgate's outside counsel, Skadden Arps billed $9.3 million in the first year just for discovery and motion practice. The settlement math was brutal. Colgate's legal team, led by General Counsel Andrew Forrester, analyzed potential exposure. If courts certified the class and plaintiffs won at trial, damages could reach $3 billion based on the number of Colgate Total users over 12 years. Even if Colgate won, defense costs would run into hundreds of millions. The rational business decision was to settle, seal the records, and move on. The first settlement came in August 2010. Terms were confidential, but court filings showed the settlement fund totaled $47 million distributed to class members who submitted claims. Colgate admitted no wrongdoing. The settlement included no requirement for reformulation or warning labels. It was purely financial, a cost of doing business calculated to be cheaper than fighting. But the legal settlements didn't stop the market bleeding. Competitors had been watching, and they smelled blood. Tom's of Maine, a small natural products company acquired by Colgate itself in 2006, but run independently, launched a marketing campaign in late 2009 emphasizing no triclosan, no artificial ingredients, nothing questionable. The campaign didn't mention Colgate by name, but the implication was obvious. Sales of Tom's toothpaste jumped 41% in the first quarter of 2010. Procter & Gamble, which owned Crest, began reformulating products to remove triclosan and other chemicals facing scrutiny. By early 2010, Crest could advertise triclosan-free across its entire product line. Market research showed that 36% of consumers now viewed chemical-free or natural formulations as important purchase criteria, up from 9% just 5 years earlier. The trust that had once flowed to established brands was shifting toward products that promised transparency. Colgate's market share started eroding. From its peak of 53% in 2006, the company fell to 47% by 2010, losing 6 percentage points in 4 years. Each percentage point represented roughly $60 million in annual revenue. The loss compounded because retailers allocated shelf space based on sales velocity. As Colgate tubes moved slower, stores reduced facing counts, making the products less visible, which further suppressed sales. Stock analysts downgraded Colgate from buy to hold. Share price dropped from $76 in January 2009 to $63 by October 2010, a 17% decline while the broader market recovered from the financial crisis. Institutional investors started asking pointed questions on earnings calls. Would the company reformulate? What was the timeline? How much would it cost? CEO Ian Cook, who'd replaced Reuben Mark in 2007, deflected. He promised the company was monitoring the science and would act appropriately when regulations require it. Inside the Jersey City factory, the atmosphere shifted from pride to anxiety. Workers read newspaper coverage of the lawsuits. They saw competitors advertising triclosan-free formulas. They wondered if they were making something dangerous, if their work over decades had harmed people rather than helped them. Arthur Simmons, now 73 and retired, but still living 2 blocks from the factory, told a local reporter, "We believed what they told us. We trusted the company. Now I don't know what to think." The public relations team worked 16-hour days trying to contain the damage. Patricia Lewis and her staff of 12 fielded hundreds of media inquiries monthly. They prepared talking points emphasizing FDA approval, clinical safety data, and the difference between theoretical risk and actual harm. But every statement felt defensive. Every mention of ongoing review sounded like an admission of uncertainty. The more they explained, the worse it got. And the shame wasn't in the lawsuits themselves. Companies get sued. The shame was in the gap between what was known internally and what was said publicly. Employees who'd spent careers believing in the product now confronted evidence that leadership had knowingly delayed acting on safety warnings for 30 years. The pride they'd taken in building trust curdled into something uglier. They'd been instruments of a strategy they didn't understand, mixing compounds whose risks were documented in memos they'd never seen. Revenue from Colgate total specifically dropped from $312 million in 2008 to $241 million in 2010, a 23% decline in 2 years. The company discontinued 14 product variations in a consolidating to core SKUs in a cost-cutting move that acknowledged reality. The flagship product that had driven growth for 3 decades was dying, and the Jersey City factory, which had produced Colgate Total since its launch in 1983, was about to pay the ultimate price. The business logic was inescapable. Production capacity exceeded demand. Operating costs in New Jersey were higher than alternatives. The facility that had once symbolized strength now represented vulnerability. On September 23, 2010, corporate headquarters in New York sent a notice to the Jersey City plant manager, Dennis Walsh. A conference call was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Attendance mandatory. Topic: facility rationalization. Walsh had worked for Colgate for 37 years. He knew what rationalization meant, as it meant the end. The factory falls silent. In 2010, the gates closed. Dennis Walsh stood in the factory's main conference room on the morning of September the 28th, watching his laptop screen load the video call from corporate headquarters. Across from him sat the 3 shift supervisors: Maria Gonzalez, who'd run first shift for 14 years, Kevin O'Brien, second shift for 19, and Thomas Brennan Jr., third shift for 22 years, grandson of the original Thomas Brennan, who'd started in 1909. They knew why they'd been summoned. The question was only timing and severance. The video connected. Ian Cook appeared on screen, flanked by Chief Operating Officer Noel Wallace and HR Director Susan Chen. Cook didn't waste time on pleasantries. Effective January 15, 2011, We're consolidating North American production at our Morristown facility and transitioning Jersey City toothpaste production to our Toluca plant in Mexico. Jersey City operations will cease. The facility will be sold or repurposed. All hourly workers will receive termination notices 60 days prior to closure per WARN Act requirements. Supervisory and administrative staff have the option to transfer to Morristown or take voluntary separation packages. The words landed like a physical blow. Walsh felt his chest tighten. Beside him, Maria Gonzalez's hand went to her mouth. The factory employed 1,870 workers, 1,870 families. Jersey City median household income was $41,000. Factory jobs paid $54,000 on average, plus benefits. But those jobs were the economic foundation for entire neighborhoods. Cook continued reading from prepared remarks. This decision reflects operational efficiency requirements in a competitive market. Toluca production costs run 38% lower than Jersey City. The Morristown facility has newer equipment and 40% excess capacity following automation upgrades. Consolidation saves approximately $73 million annually. Those savings are necessary to maintain competitive pricing and fund innovation. What Cook didn't say was equally revealing. The Jersey City factory had operated at 78% capacity in 2010, down from 96% in 2006. Declining Colgate total sales accounted for most of the drop. The facility that had built its identity around the flagship antibacterial product no longer had enough product to justify its existence. Moving production to Mexico wasn't just about labor costs. It was about distancing the brand from the controversy. A fresh start in a facility with no connection to triclosan's troubled history. Walsh asked the only question that mattered to the people he supervised. "What's the severance package?" Susan Chen took over. Hourly workers receive 1 week of pay per year of service, capped at 26 weeks. Healthcare continuation for 6 months. Retirement accounts fully vest immediately, regardless of tenure. We're partnering with New Jersey Workforce Development to provide job placement assistance and retraining vouchers worth up to $5,000 per worker. Walsh did the math instantly. The average Jersey City worker had 12 years tenure, 12 weeks of severance, 3 months of income to find new work in an economy still recovering from the financial crisis, in a state where manufacturing jobs had declined 42% over the past decade. The $5,000 retraining vouchers were insulting. What were workers in their 40s and 50s supposed to retrain for? The factory had been their career, their identity, their stability. "What about us?" Kevin O'Brien asked, meaning the supervisors and administrative staff. "Transfer to Morristown with relocation assistance up to $30,000, or voluntary separation of 1 month's salary per year of service, capped at 12 months, Chen replied. "We need decisions within 30 days. The call ended 10 minutes later. Walsh sat in silence with his team. The decision had already been made. They were delivering bad news, not seeking input. The Jersey City factory's fate had been sealed in spreadsheets and board presentations they'd never seen, calculated by executives who'd never walked the production floor. Walsh delivered the news to workers in shifts over the next 3 days. He'd prepared remarks but abandoned them after the first meeting. You couldn't script this. First shift gathered in the cafeteria at 11 a.m. on September 29th. Walsh stood on a chair so everyone could see him. "Corporate is closing the plant," he said. "January 15th is the last day. I'm sorry." The reaction wasn't dramatic. No shouting or crying in that first moment. just silence, heavy and stunned. Then questions cascaded. What about benefits? Will there be other jobs? Can we transfer? Walsh answered what he could, honestly admitting he didn't know most of it. The details would come. Right now, he just needed them to hear it from him, rather than rumors or the media. Maria Gonzalez took the news to her crew differently. She called them together in small groups of 15 or 20, sat down with them, told them directly, and then stayed to listen. A woman named Patricia Ruiz, who'd worked quality control for 18 years, asked the question everyone was thinking. Did we do something wrong? Is this because of the lawsuits? Gonzalez couldn't lie. It's complicated. Sales are down, costs are high. The lawsuits didn't help. But this isn't about your work. You've done everything right. The company is making a business decision. A business decision that screws us, someone said from the back. Gonzalez didn't argue. She couldn't. It was true. The final months were strange. Production continued because inventory still needed to meet demand through the transition. Workers showed up, ran their shifts, met their quotas. But the energy was gone. The pride that had fueled 3 generations evaporated. They were manufacturing for a company that had already abandoned them, filling tubes for products whose safety they no longer trusted, building wealth for shareholders who decided their labor was too expensive. Small acts of resistance emerged. Productivity dropped 3% in November, then 5% in December. Not sabotage, just the subtle withdrawal of discretionary effort. Yet workers did exactly what was required, and nothing more. The initiative that had driven continuous improvement for decades disappeared. Why suggest efficiency improvements for a factory being shuttered? The union, Local 347 of the United Food and Commercial Workers, tried negotiating. They proposed wage cuts, benefit reductions, anything to keep the facility operating. Corporate refused to engage. The decision was final. The union then focused on improving severance terms. After 2 weeks of negotiations, they secured an additional 2 weeks of pay for workers with more than 20 years tenure and extended health care to 9 months. Small victories that felt hollow. Thomas Brennan Jr. worked his final shift on January 14th, 2011. Third shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., the same hours his grandfather had worked a century earlier. He walked the production floor one last time, watching the machines that would be sold for scrap or shipped to Mexico. In his pocket, he carried a small brass gear his grandfather had saved from one of the original mixers, installed in 1909. 3 generations of Brennans had built their lives around this factory. Now it was ending, not because the work didn't matter, but because it could be done cheaper elsewhere. The last tube of toothpaste produced in Jersey City came off line 4 at 5:47 a.m. on January 15th. Workers gathered around as the machine cycled down for the final time. Someone suggested they should sign the tube, make it a monument, but there was no ceremony. They just let it roll into the collection bin with all the others. One more tube in 12 billion produced over a century, indistinguishable and forgotten. Security locked the gates at noon. Walsh stood outside, watching workers file out carrying boxes of personal items, lunch pails empty, boots they'd never wear to this building again. Some cried. Most just looked tired, betrayed, angry in a defeated way that comes from knowing the fight is already lost. The factory that had defined Jersey City for 107 years went dark. Brick and steel don't feel abandonment, but the neighborhoods around them do. What remains on the Hudson? Brick outlasts trust. The Jersey City factory site sat vacant for 3 years after the closure. Chain-link fencing surrounded 22 acres of empty buildings. Windows that had once flooded production floors with natural light now stared blank and dark. Graffiti appeared on the east facade within months, tagging over the faded Colgate name that had greeted ships for a century. The building became what abandoned factories always become, a monument to decisions made elsewhere by people who never lived with the consequences. The economic impact radiated through the surrounding neighborhoods like a slow-moving collapse. Property values within 6 blocks dropped an average of 18% between 2011 and 2014. The tax base that had funded schools and infrastructure for generations evaporated. Jersey City lost approximately $11 million in annual tax revenue. The school district cut 42 teaching positions. 2 fire stations reduced staffing. The police department delayed equipment upgrades. Sacred Heart Church on Erie Street, which had served factory workers since 1912, saw attendance drop 31%. Father Michael Ramos watched families leave Jersey City entirely, relocating to Pennsylvania or North Carolina, chasing manufacturing jobs that were themselves disappearing. The families who stayed struggled. Median household income in the neighborhoods surrounding the factory fell from $51,000 in 2010 to $43,000 by 2013. The workers themselves faced futures they hadn't prepared for. Patricia Ruiz, the quality control specialist who'd asked if they'd done something wrong, spent 14 months unemployed before finding work as a home health aide, earning $13 per hour, less than half her factory wage. She lost her house to foreclosure in 2012. Thomas Brennan Jr. took his severance package rather than transfer to Morristown. At 58 years old, with 37 years in toothpaste manufacturing, he discovered his skills weren't transferable. The retraining voucher paid for a certification in HVAC repair. He found occasional contractor work, but nothing steady. His pension, which would have maxed out with 40 years of service, locked in at 37 years, reducing his monthly retirement income by $420 for life. Dennis Walsh transferred to Morristown, but lasted only 18 months before retiring early. The facility ran differently, leaner, more automated, with less tolerance for the worker-centered management style he'd practiced. He moved back to Jersey City and watched the old factory decay from his living room window 8 blocks away. In interviews with local historians in 2015, he described a persistent sense of guilt, as though he should have fought harder, though he couldn't articulate what that fight would have looked like. You can't fight spreadsheets. The factory site finally sold in 2014 to a real estate development group for $38 million, a fraction of its assessed value at peak operation. The developers demolished 4 of the 6 buildings and converted the remaining structures into mixed-use space. Ground floor retail, upper floor residential lofts. The marketing materials emphasize the building's industrial heritage and authentic brick architecture. 1-bedroom units rented for $2,400 monthly, triple what factory workers had paid for mortgages on full houses. The repurposing erased the history it claimed to honor. New residents moved in, knowing nothing of the paste mixed in those rooms. The workers who'd spent careers inside those walls. The trust built and broken over a century. The building persisted, but its meaning had been stripped away as thoroughly as the production equipment sold for scrap. By 2016, when the FDA finally banned triclosan in over-the-counter antiseptic products, including toothpaste, the Jersey City factory was already unrecognizable. Colgate reformulated without the ingredient it had defended for 30 years, launching the new triclosan-free version with minimal acknowledgement of why the change was necessary. Sales recovered slightly. Market share stabilized at 44%. But the workers who'd built that market share, who'd believed in the product and the company, received no acknowledgement at all. They were collateral damage in a business decision that prioritized efficiency over loyalty, shareholders over communities, and quarterly earnings over the people who generated them for generations. The brick remained on the Hudson. Everything else was gone. The pattern repeats. Delay is the oldest defense. The Colgate story isn't unique. It's a template that repeats across industries with mechanical precision whenever science identifies risks before regulation forces action. The pattern is consistent enough to predict. Internal researchers find troubling evidence. Executives calculate the cost of response versus the cost of delay, and delay wins because the consequences fall on others while the benefits accrue immediately. Johnson & Johnson knew about asbestos contamination in talcum powder as early as 1971. Internal memos documented the findings. The company continued selling the product for 48 years until forced to discontinue it in 2020. The delay strategy bought decades of sales and cost thousands of ovarian cancer cases, according to jury findings in multiple trials. Settlement costs eventually exceeded $9 billion, but spread over 48 years. That translated to roughly $187 million annually, manageable against a product generating billions in revenue. Purdue Pharma understood OxyContin's addiction potential by the mid-1990s based on internal monitoring and physician reports. The company responded not by restricting distribution, but by expanding marketing, training sales representatives to downplay addiction risks. The delay between knowledge and meaningful action spanned approximately 15 years, during which opioid addiction rates exploded. The Sackler family extracted over $10 billion from the company before bankruptcy proceedings began. Volkswagen engineers knew their diesel emissions cheating software violated regulations the moment they installed it in 2008. The scheme continued until exposed by external researchers in 2015. 7 years of deliberate deception, 11 million vehicles affected worldwide, fines totaling $33 billion. Yet even after discovery, Volkswagen remained profitable and operational. The company survived the scandal that individual employees would never have survived. The common elements across these cases reveal the structural incentives that make delay rational from a corporate perspective. First, regulatory systems move slowly, creating years or decades between initial evidence and enforcement action. Second, internal findings remain confidential unless leaked or subpoenaed, meaning companies control the flow of negative information. Third, executive compensation structures reward short-term performance, making delay profitable for the individuals making decisions, even if long-term costs eventually exceed benefits. Fourth, the diffuse nature of harm makes causation difficult to prove, enabling companies to demand impossible standards of evidence before acting. Dr. David Michaels, who served as Assistant Secretary of Labor for OSHA under President Obama, documented this pattern in his book, Doubt is Their Product. Michaels showed how industries systematically manufacture uncertainty around health risks by funding contradictory research, emphasizing gaps in scientific consensus, and demanding absolute proof before accepting precautionary restrictions. The strategy works because science rarely provides absolute proof, especially for long-latency harms like cancer or endocrine disruption that take years or decades to manifest. The toothpaste workers in Jersey City, the women who developed ovarian cancer from talc, the families devastated by opioid addiction, the communities breathing Volkswagen's excess emissions. They all paid the price for a strategy that treated uncertainty as permission to continue rather than reason to pause. They were externalities and calculations that weighed their welfare against corporate revenue and found the revenue more valuable. Modern cases continue the pattern. PFAS chemicals, known internally to manufacturers as problematic since the 1960s, remain in thousands of consumer products despite documented health risks. Microplastics contamination, understood by plastics manufacturers for decades, receives industry opposition to regulation. Glyphosate herbicide, linked to cancer in numerous studies, faces coordinated defense from agricultural chemical companies, despite settlements exceeding $10 billion. What makes the pattern durable is its profitability. Even accounting for eventual legal settlements, regulatory fines, and remediation costs, delay frequently generates positive net present value. $1 of profit today, invested at market returns, compounds faster than liability costs that arrive years later and can be negotiated down, spread across time, or sometimes avoided entirely through bankruptcy. The workers and consumers harmed by these delays don't compound. They absorb the losses in health destroyed, careers ended, communities disrupted. The asymmetry is structural, embedded in legal frameworks that prioritize property rights over human welfare, quarterly earnings over long-term consequences, and shareholder returns over stakeholder protection. Colgate's factory fell silent, but the strategy that killed it thrives, refined and repeated wherever the incentives align. Until the cost of delay exceeds its benefit, or until regulatory structures change to make delay impossible, the pattern will continue. Science will identify risks, companies will calculate, workers and consumers will wait, and trust will erode, one delayed disclosure at a time. The price of trust. Trust compounds or collapses. The Colgate name still appears on toothpaste tubes in 76% of American bathrooms today. The brand survived triclosan, survived the lawsuits, survived the factory closure. Market share has stabilized. Revenue grows modestly year over year. By conventional business metrics, the company recovered. The strategy of delay, for all its costs, didn't destroy the enterprise. But the calculation misses what was actually lost. Trust isn't simply brand recognition or market share. It's the belief that institutions act in your interest, that expertise serves truth, that power accepts accountability. Colgate spent a century building that trust through consistent product quality, steady employment, and partnership with dental professionals. The company taught America to brush, transformed public health, and created communities around stable manufacturing work. That trust was real, earned through decades of reliability. The decision to delay action on triclosan for 30 years traded that accumulated trust for extended revenue. The math worked in spreadsheets because trust doesn't appear on balance sheets. You can't quantify what it means when workers realize the company they served for generations valued quarterly earnings over their welfare. You can't calculate the cost when consumers learn that dentist recommendations were shaped by corporate funding, that safety claims rested on regulatory inaction rather than scientific certainty. Margaret Chen, the toxicologist whose 1985 memo documented triclosan risks, left Colgate and spent her career at the EPA working to strengthen testing requirements for consumer products. She never spoke publicly about her time at Colgate until interviewed for this account in 2022. At 71, recently retired, she reflected on what the delay cost. Millions of people used that product daily for 30 years after we knew it posed potential risks. Some probably experienced no harm. Others might have thyroid issues, reproductive problems, complications we'll never be able to definitively link to triclosan because the exposures were so widespread and the effects so delayed. We'll never know the true cost because we chose not to find out. The workers paid more, visibly. Thomas Brennan Jr., that died in 2019 at age 67, 8 years short of the life expectancy for men of his generation. His pension, reduced by his early departure, left his widow struggling. Dennis Walsh developed early-onset dementia in 2021. His wife believes the stress of the closure contributed, though no doctor could confirm it. Patricia Ruiz still works as a home health aide at 62, unable to afford retirement. The severance ran out years ago. The promised job retraining led nowhere sustainable. The lesson from Jersey City isn't that corporations are evil or that capitalism inevitably betrays workers. The lesson is simpler and harder. When institutions face choices between short-term profit and long-term accountability, structural incentives favor profit unless something forces accountability. Colgate's executives weren't uniquely corrupt. They were responding rationally to incentives that rewarded delay and punished precaution. The problem wasn't individual morality, it was systemic design. Reforming that design requires changing the incentives. Regulatory systems that act on preliminary evidence rather than waiting for conclusive proof. Compensation structures that reward long-term stakeholder value rather than quarterly earnings. Legal frameworks that make delay more expensive than transparency. Whistleblower protection strong enough that researchers like Margaret Chen can escalate concerns without ending their careers. None of this is impossible. Some European regulatory systems already operate on precautionary principles that shift the burden of proof to manufacturers. Some companies have adopted stakeholder governance models that consider worker and community impact alongside shareholder returns. The tools exist. What's missing is the will to deploy them against entrenched interests that benefit from the current arrangement. The Jersey City factory site, now luxury lofts and artisanal coffee shops, offers no plaques commemorating the workers who spent careers there. No memorial acknowledges the trust built and broken over a century. The history has been aestheticized into industrial chic architecture, the human cost erased. But the cost was real. 2,000 jobs lost, families displaced, communities impoverished, and beyond Jersey City, millions of consumers who learned that trust your dentist meant trust corporate profit calculations, that clean and healthy meant safe until proven otherwise, that innovation and accountability could be separated indefinitely if the incentives aligned. Trust, once lost, rebuilds slowly, if at all. Colgate's market share may have stabilized, but the implicit contract between institutions and the people they serve remains broken. The factory fell silent. The question is whether anyone heard what its closure was saying.